Lady Alina Ashworth had long ago accepted that she would never wear orange blossoms in her hair. At 28, she had become what polite society whispered about in drawing rooms, a spinster, that pitiful creature who had somehow missed her chance. But Alina knew the truth. She hadn't missed her chance. She had surrendered it willingly, one day at a time, for 10 years. The ballroom of Hartfield Manor glittered with celebration. Her youngest sister, Lydia, had just married the Marquis of Blackwood in a ceremony so splendid it would be discussed for seasons to come. Alina stood at the edge of the festivities, watching her 3 sisters, all married, all radiant, dance with their respective lords. Catherine, the second eldest, was now Countess of Pemberton. Margaret had become Viscountess Hartley, and now Lydia was a Marchioness. Each wedding had been a triumph. Each sister had made what their father called an excellent match. And each time Alina had been there, adjusting veils, calming nerves, offering the wisdom she'd gleaned from the hundreds of books she'd consumed during the long nights at their mother's bedside. "More champagne, my lady." A footman appeared at her elbow. "No, thank you." Alina smiled kindly at him. She'd learned that servants appreciated courtesy from ladies who had time to offer it. She had plenty of time. The orchestra struck up another waltz. Alina's feet remembered the steps from her long-ago dancing lessons, before her mother's illness had consumed everything. She'd been 18 when the physicians had delivered their grave prognosis. Her sisters had been 15, 13, and 11, too young to manage a household and nurse an invalid. Her father had been drowning in his own grief, so Alina had stepped forward. She dismissed the season her mother had planned for her. She'd sent her regrets to the house parties, the balls, the carefully orchestrated opportunities to catch a husband. Instead, she'd learned to manage laudanum doses and read medical texts. She'd held her mother's hand through endless nights and had somehow kept their household from falling apart. By the time her mother had finally found peace, Alina's youth had slipped away like water through her fingers. Her sisters had made their debuts while she'd worn mourning black. And when her own half-mourning had ended, she'd been 24, ancient by ton standards, with no connections, no season, no chance. But her sisters had flourished. Alina had made certain of it. Poor dear Alina. The voice drifted from behind a potted palm. Alina froze, her hand on the French door leading to the terrace. "Quite on the shelf now, isn't she?" Lady Worthington's nasal tone was unmistakable. All that intelligence and not a whit of beauty to recommend her. And that unfortunate habit of expressing opinions. "At least she'll have her sisters' homes to visit," another voice added with false sympathy. "Though one does wonder what she'll do with herself. No husband, no children, no purpose." Alina's fingers tightened on the door handle. She'd heard such whispers before, but tonight they cut deeper. Perhaps because Lydia's wedding, the last wedding, felt like a door closing on Alina's own story. She slipped through the door into the cool evening air, then made her way down the darkened corridor to her true sanctuary, her father's library. The room smelled of leather and old paper, of ink and possibilities. Alina lit a single candle and let her fingers trail along familiar spines until she found what she sought, a treatise on parliamentary reform she'd been reading before the wedding chaos had consumed her attention. She settled into the worn wing chair by the window, tucking her feet beneath her unfashionably practical gown, and opened the book. Here, at least, she could forget about orange blossoms and pitying glances. Interesting choice for a wedding celebration. Alina started violently, nearly dropping the book. A man emerged from the shadows near the far bookshelf, tall and imposing in formal evening dress. "I apologize for startling you." His voice was deep, cultured, edged with something that might have been amusement. "I too found the festivities somewhat overwhelming." As he stepped into the candlelight, Alina's breath caught. She recognized him instantly, everyone in England would. Alexander Vane, Duke of Rothwell, arguably the most powerful peer in the realm. Dark hair silvered at the temples, sharp aristocratic features, eyes the color of a winter storm. He was attending Lydia's wedding because the Marquis of Blackwood was his second cousin. Alina should stand. She should curtsy. She should stammer some appropriate greeting. Instead, she said, "Then you have excellent taste in refuge, Your Grace. Libraries are vastly superior to ballrooms." His eyebrow rose fractionally. "You don't stand on ceremony." "Forgive me." Elinor began to rise. "Don't." The single word stopped her. "I meant it as a compliment. Do you know how exhausting it is when everyone treats you as though you might shatter if they breathe incorrectly?" Despite herself, Elinor smiled. "I imagine it's rather like being a spinster. Everyone speaks to you with that particular tone of pity, as though your lack of a husband is a terminal condition." "And is it?" He moved closer, his gaze dropping to the book in her lap. "Terminal. But only if one believes that marriage is the sole purpose of a woman's existence." Elinor met his eyes directly. "I've found that books offer better conversation than most people, and they never expect me to simper or pretend ignorance to protect their pride." Parliamentary Reform. He read the title with obvious interest. "What's your position on the proposed expansions?" And there in the library, while her sister's wedding celebration continued without them, Lady Elinor Ashworth forgot every rule of proper behavior. She debated. She argued. She challenged a duke. And for the first time in years, she felt genuinely alive. The morning after Lydia's wedding, Elinor woke to find London society had developed a peculiar new obsession. The Duke of Rothwell's unprecedented attendance at events he had previously deemed beneath his notice. He appeared at Lady Carmichael's musicale, an entertainment he'd refused for 3 consecutive years. He was seen at the Royal Academy exhibition, standing before a landscape painting, deep in conversation with Lady Elinor Ashworth about the artist's technique and the politics of patronage. Most shocking of all, he attended a meeting of the Ladies' Charitable Education Society, an organization dedicated to educating poor girls. He was the only man present, and he sat through the entire proceeding with evident interest, asking pointed questions about curriculum and funding. Elinor tried to convince herself it meant nothing. They'd had one interesting conversation. The Duke was simply broadening his social engagement. It had nothing to do with her. "He's courting you," Catherine declared over tea at Pemberton House, her eyes bright with excitement. "Don't be absurd." Elinor set down her cup with more force than necessary. "The Duke of Rothwell does not court aging spinsters." "You're 28, not 80, Margaret chided. "And you're brilliant. Why shouldn't he be interested?" "Because," Elinor gestured helplessly at herself. "Look at me. I'm plain, I'm poor. I have no connections beyond my sister's marriages. I'm everything the Duke of Rothwell doesn't need." "Perhaps," Lydia said softly, "he needs something different than what society thinks." But Elinor couldn't afford hope. She'd watched too many women become laughingstocks for reading too much into a powerful man's attention. So when the Duke requested her assistance with a charitable matter, she agreed cautiously, determined to maintain proper distance. The matter, as it turned out, was her own Ladies' Charitable Education Society. "I want to fund an expansion," Rothwell announced without preamble, standing in the modest building where Elinor held classes 3 times weekly. 5 new schools across London, proper facilities, trained teachers, books. Elinor stared at him. "That would cost." "I know what it would cost. I can afford it." He paused. "But I have one condition. You must manage the project personally. I won't trust this to anyone else." "Your Grace, I'm hardly qualified." "You've been running this organization for 3 years with virtually no resources. You've educated over 200 girls. You've placed them in respectable positions. You've changed lives, Lady Elinor." His gray eyes held hers. "You're the most qualified person I know." Over the following weeks, they worked together almost daily. Elinor found herself in the Duke's study, reviewing architectural plans. She sat across from him at meetings with builders and educators. She watched him negotiate contracts with the same sharp intelligence he'd shown in their first conversation. And slowly, dangerously, she began to forget why this was impossible. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of inspecting potential school sites, Alina remained at the charity house long after everyone else had departed. She was reconciling accounts by candlelight when Rothwell returned. "You're still here." He sounded concerned. "Alina, it's past 10 o'clock." She looked up, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "There's always more to do." That's not an answer. He sat across from her, his formal demeanor softening. "When do you rest?" "I rest enough." "You're lying." His directness should have offended her. Instead, it cracked something inside her chest. "What does it matter?" The words escaped before she could stop them. "I gave them the best years of my life. My mother, my sisters. I have no regrets, but sometimes I wonder." She pressed her fingers to her eyes. "What was left for me? Everyone else got their happy ending. I got to watch." The silence stretched between them. Then Rothwell spoke, his voice rough with something she couldn't identify. "You think you're alone in that? I'm the Duke of Rothwell. I control estates across England. I advise the Prince Regent. I can alter the course of legislation with a word." He leaned forward. "And I've been alone at the top of this mountain, surrounded by people who want my title, my wealth, my influence, but never me, never just Alexander." Alina met his eyes, saw her own loneliness reflected there, and felt something shift irreversibly in her heart. But London society was less kind. Within days, the gossip began in earnest. At Lady Westbrook's ball, Alina overheard the whispers behind fans. "The Duke is amusing himself with the spinster. How cruel." She actually believes he's interested. One almost pities her delusion. Lady Worthington's voice cut through the crowd. "Poor Alina Ashworth. First she loses her youth caring for her mother. Now she'll lose her dignity chasing a duke who's clearly just being charitable." The words landed like physical blows. Alina had endured pity, but mockery was something else entirely. She couldn't, become the cautionary tale society was already writing. That night she sat at her writing desk until dawn, composing and recomposing a letter. The final version was brief, formal, and broke something inside her with every word. "Your Grace, I fear our collaboration has created unfortunate misunderstandings. For the sake of both our reputations, I believe it best that we conclude our association. Mr. Peters can manage the school expansion admirably. Thank you for your generosity to our cause. Lady Alina Ashworth." She sent it before she could reconsider, then spent the day staring at nothing, feeling hollowed out. The Duke's response arrived by evening. It contained only 5 words, written in bold, angry strokes. "This conversation is not finished," but Alina had already made her decision. She would protect her dignity, even if it cost her heart. She'd sacrificed everything else. What was one more dream? She didn't know that Alexander Vane had never walked away from anything he wanted in his life. And he wanted Alina Ashworth. Alexander Vane, Duke of Rothwell, had faced down hostile parliaments, managed financial crises, and navigated the treacherous waters of court politics without flinching. But Alina Ashworth's letter had unmanned him completely. For 3 days, he'd honored her request for distance, believing she simply needed time. On the 4th day, his daughter had asked the question that shattered his restraint. "When is Lady Alina coming to visit, Papa?" 5-year-old Charlotte looked up from her dolls with her mother's blue eyes. "She promised to bring me a book about explorers." "Lady Alina is occupied with other matters." "Doesn't she like us anymore?" The quaver in Charlotte's voice cut straight to his heart. That was when Alexander understood. Alina hadn't ended their association to protect herself. She'd ended it to protect him from society's censure. She believed the gossip, that he was merely being charitable, that any real attachment was impossible. She believed she wasn't worthy of being chosen. The realization filled him with fury at a world that could convince a woman of Alina's caliber that she was somehow lacking. And with absolute certainty about what he needed to do. "Charlotte," he said, kneeling to meet his daughter's eyes, "how would you feel about having Lady Alina in our lives always?" The Pemberton Ball was the event of the season. Every important family in London had gathered at the Earl and Countess of Pemberton's magnificent ballroom. Alina stood near the windows, watching her sisters dance, trying to ignore the pitying glances cast her way since her association with the Duke had so publicly ended. Lady Alina. Catherine appeared at her elbow, slightly breathless. "You should know." "The Duke of Rothwell," the majordomo announced. The ballroom fell silent. Rothwell never attended such events, and everyone knew about the apparent rupture between him and Lady Alina. His presence here was unprecedented. Alina's heart hammered against her ribs as Alexander strode through the crowd, his eyes fixed solely on her. People parted before him like water, and the whispers began immediately. "What is he doing?" "But surely he wouldn't." "Not here, not publicly." Alexander stopped directly before Alina. The entire ballroom watched. Lady Worthington, the marriage-minded mammas, the cruel gossips, her sisters, everyone who had ever pitied her or dismissed her. Then the Duke of Rothwell did something no one present had ever witnessed, something that violated every rule of aristocratic dignity and social hierarchy. He knelt. The gasps echoed through the ballroom like a wave. Dukes didn't kneel, not to anyone except the monarch. It was beneath their station, a surrender of the power that defined them. But Alexander knelt before Alina Ashworth as though she were a queen. "Your Grace, please," Alina's voice shook. "You shouldn't." "Let them see." His voice carried across the silent ballroom. "Let every person in this room see that the most powerful duke in England kneels before the worthiest woman he has ever known." Alina felt tears burning behind her eyes. "You're making a spectacle." "Good." His gray eyes blazed with intensity. "You ended our association to protect me from gossip, but Alina, I don't need protection. I need you." "You don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly." He reached for her hand and she was powerless to stop him. "You think society's opinion matters to me. You think I care what these people whisper. I've spent 5 years alone, raising my daughter, managing my duties, surrounded by people who see only my title. Then I met you in that library, and for the first time since my wife died, I felt alive." "But, Your Grace." "Alexander," he corrected firmly. "You've given everything to everyone else. Your mother, your sisters, your charity work. You think you're what was left over after everyone else took what they needed. You're wrong, Alina. You're not what remained. You're what I've been waiting for." Alina's composure cracked. "They'll say you're being foolish, that you could have anyone." "I don't want anyone." His grip on her hand tightened. "Your sisters married lords. Catherine has her earl, Margaret has her viscount, Lydia has her marquess. But Alina, I'm asking you to make me the luckiest duke in England. Not because of duty or obligation or charity, because you challenge me, because you see me, because my daughter asks for you. Because when I imagine my future, you're in every part of it." The tears spilled over. Alina looked down at this impossibly powerful man kneeling at her feet, offering her everything she'd convinced herself she could never have. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "So am I," his admission shocked her. "I'm terrified, but I'm more afraid of losing you because I wasn't brave enough to fight for what matters." Alina looked around the ballroom. Every eye was fixed on them. She could refuse, preserve her dignity, retreat into the safe half-life she'd built, or she could be brave for once. Not for her mother, not for her sisters, but for herself. "Rise, Your Grace," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent room. "A duke shouldn't kneel. But a man proposing to his equal should stand beside her." Alexander rose, and the smile that transformed his face was incandescent. He stood beside her, their hands clasped, facing the stunned assembly together. "Is that a yes?" he asked softly. "That's a yes." He kissed her hand, then turned to address the room. "The Duke of Rothwell is engaged to Lady Alina Ashworth. Anyone who has objections may direct them to me personally." No one spoke. No one dared. Lady Worthington looked apoplectic. Catherine was crying. Margaret and Lydia pushed through the crowd to embrace their sister. And Alina, who had spent years being what everyone needed, finally became what she was meant to be. chosen, cherished, and completely, impossibly loved.